I just felt my body breaking down. I really did. And I kind of reached a point where I knew if I didn't get out, I just wasn't going to survive. It just was not sustainable, the level of stress. When I actually left, it took a year before I filed for divorce. That's a long time. That was a very scary thing to do. I did not know what his reaction was going to be. I had to really kind of find myself and build some courage.
Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Dr. Shafer of Talks with Dr. Shafer. Please like and subscribe to the show so that you don't miss any inspiring stories. Today, we have an amazing one to share with you. I am so excited to have the opportunity to share the story of an amazing and inspiring woman, Mia J. Hanks. Today, we are so grateful to welcome special guest author and domestic abuse survivor, Mia J. Hanks, on the show. Mia J. Hanks is sharing her story in a thoughtful and vulnerable way through her book, Bridemaid, a memoir, and helping others recognize narcissistic abuse through the power of storytelling. Mia, thank you so much for being here, for sharing your story so generously, and for helping further our understanding of what it is like to live with domestic abuse.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
It's such a pleasure to have you here. Of course, it's not a pleasure to have these conversations, but we know that to make the world a safer place for people who are coming up behind us and for people who are living beside us, we need to share these stories. Now, I want to start with a focus on, speaking of your story, Bridemaid. Share with us how you were inspired to name your book, Bridemaid.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting story. I wanted to come up with a name that was catchy, obviously, attention getting, but I didn't want it to sound like all the other books out there. So I didn't really want to use the word abuse or narcissist. Um, I felt like it was kind of overused. And so bridemaid is kind of a play on words. Um, it sort of implies that I was, if you read my book, you know that I married very young. And so I was this young bride, and I was basically made or molded into what my husband wanted me to be. So yeah, it is kind of a play on words, but I was basically made into what he wanted, or he tried to make me into the perfect bride.
I find that very interesting because I think just like any story that we read, there's a backstory, right? There's a preamble to that story. And I think there is a shared experience amongst many women in society of being bridemaid, of being not just by one individual, but really by culture prepared to serve and to fit into a role when we marry. And when we marry very young, I think because neurologically we haven't reached certain phases in our development yet, there's an even greater risk for the choices we make and our susceptibility to trying with every ounce of our being to fit into those roles, even if they don't serve us, even if they're not healthy or safe for us.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think another thing that society kind of tells us from a young age is, when you get married, you work it out. You stay in that marriage. You don't abandon it. And especially when you bring kids into the marriage, I think we're kind of ingrained to obviously want to keep our families together. You don't want your children to be children of divorce. But I think that kind of, that doesn't really, it's not applicable when you're in an abusive relationship. But still, that plays out in your head. You're supposed to stay with this. You're supposed to not break up your family. So, yeah, definitely those ideals, I think cause people to stay in these relationships longer than they should.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting because, and I've heard you speak on this as well, when you're in the relationship and you have young children, an experience that I've heard many people say and I have shared is you at first want to stay together for the kids. We're doing air quotes now, for the kids. And the thing is, you're not necessarily taking a step back and saying, okay, what does that mean? What are the long-term consequences? if I go out and read all the books about people who stayed for the kids, how did that go, right? We're kind of stuck and isolated into our own world experience and this work it out experience. Whereas if we were really taking a step back and being measured and being critical about what our decisions mean, not only for ourselves, but for the little ones who, if we have children, are experiencing this abuse next to us, what does that really mean? How's that going to play out not only in our lives, but in their lives?
Yeah. And I think one thing that people don't think about is when they are staying for the kids, you do have to think, what am I modeling for my kids? And in my situation, my kids really did not get to see what a healthy marriage looked like. And so while I thought I was doing the right thing, and of course I had the best of intentions, in retrospect, it was not the right thing to do. So hindsight is 2020, but yeah, the idea of staying for the kids when there's abuse involved really is it's not the right decision.
Right. And it's interesting too because, we discussed reaching out to other resources to maybe give you a different worldview than what you are experiencing. But the reality is, when you are experiencing abuse and your family is experiencing abuse, you can feel so isolated and like there is no other way. And you're often receiving that message of this is the way it is from your partner who is making you subservient, who is abusing you.
Yeah, and I think, for people like me, I, I married young, and I think, you kind of fall into this. It doesn't just start overnight. It is more of a slow, a snowball effect. And you're really in the thick of it before you realize what's happening. So I think for many, many years, I didn't see my ex-husband's behavior as abuse. I didn't really, I mean, certainly that's not how I was raised. Um, but nonetheless, I thought, well, he's just a little different. And I think I just didn't, I was young, and no one ever told me about what kinds of red flags to look out for. I mean, nobody warns you about don't fall for a narcissist. Who tells you that? So, yeah, they're very conniving and they're very manipulative. And so it's usually many years before people realize that they are in a relationship, and experiencing narcissistic abuse.
And it's so important that people like yourself are coming out with a memoir, that there are psychologists coming out with books as well. There are communities springing up to support survivors to help them even recognize what's going on. Because, like you said, you can be like that frog in boiling water. And because the temperature is just going up slowly and slowly and slowly, you don't necessarily feel it going up until you're potentially boiled. And so we don't know what's happening to us. We just notice that we feel unwell. It's getting worse and worse and worse. But because it's happening so gradually over time, we don't necessarily know what to call it and we don't know what to do to help ourselves. And I want to cycle back to something else you said about really not being prepared for this. You and I, we grew up in a time where stranger danger was something that they taught us in school. But
Yes.
how often did they teach you that actually the people most likely to abuse someone, whether it's sexual abuse in children, because we know at least 1 in 4 women will have been sexually abused by the time they're 18 years old. We were told about stranger danger and don't get into the car with a stranger, don't take candy
Yes,
from strangers, all
absolutely.
those things. But we weren't necessarily taught about body autonomy and personal autonomy and safety with the people who were living in our homes, people who are in our families and our friend circles to keep us safe. Because unfortunately, statistically speaking, that was where we were at the most risk of being abused.
Right, exactly. And, you just don't think that the person that married you would be somebody that wants to hurt you. It's just that's not the way it's supposed to work. So, yeah, I think we do. I think that's why one of the reasons it takes longer to actually call it for what it is, and say, I think this is abuse because I think we don't want to think, we don't want to think this person really has that kind of vendetta against us. And I think there's also an embarrassment factor too. It's embarrassing to have to admit that, yeah, things aren't that great. So all of that sort of factors in, and I think that people end up staying in these relationships for decades. Um, Also, it's important to talk about the financial abuse that happens in these narcissistic relationships as well. So it's really sad to think that women, especially, are getting trapped in these relationships, and quite honestly, some people never find their way out, and that's really disheartening.
Absolutely. And a lot of the decisions you make along the way as you're becoming more and more financially dependent, just focusing on that one aspect of abuse when we understand that there are many aspects that sort of I envision walling someone in this position and really making them feel so stuck. A lot of the decisions you made along the way may have made sense, right? Generally speaking, we're doing the best we can at any given moment. And so when you decided, I'm going to drop out of college maybe, right? Because now I'm married and we're expecting a baby and that makes sense for us right now. In that very moment, you might have had many reasons why that made sense to you, but you weren't necessarily thinking about future you and the fact that you could not 100% bet on the set of circumstances that you have now will be the set of circumstances that you have later. And so, am I making a decision that not only serves my family now, but sets me up for success if and when life changes because it will?
Yeah, you don't plan for this sort of thing. And so, setting out as a newly married couple, it never dawned on me that I could be actually in an abusive relationship. It just was preposterous to think that. So yeah, I mean, you're not planning for those things. And um, in my situation, I was not real knowledgeable about our finances. And so, I just didn't take a lot of steps earlier on that I should have taken that would have definitely served me well later because I just wasn't planning for this. So, yeah, definitely it's the decisions that you make early. You look back and say, wow, I wish I would have done this or I wish I would have done that. But, it is what it is.
It is. And I think that it's really important to look back, but it's also really important. Okay, yes, I made these mistakes, but I can either shame myself for them or I can learn from them and choose to do better. And that's where I think, having a body of work for women to read and see themselves in characters or in other people like yourself going through similar situations and circumstances, they may have a little light bulb go off and say, maybe I should have a separate account where I have enough money to get me through
Yes.
6 months.
Yeah, I mean that's my hope that, people will pick up this book and maybe see a little bit of themselves in that and say, maybe I should rethink some of these things. Maybe I should take a harder look at this relationship. Because like I say, there are too many people and women especially that are stuck in these marriages. And like you mentioned, there are a lot of facets of abuse. So it's a complicated web for sure.
Absolutely. I want to share a quote with your permission. We talked at the top of the episode because there were so many times in reading your story that I was really struck. And I think people who read your memoir will have the same experience, especially if they have themselves experienced domestic violence or abuse, intimate partner abuse, whether it's something they experienced or even something a close friend or a family member experienced. So, one of the quotes that I read that really stuck with me was, I was still caught in the golden trap. And after 25 years of marriage, I was well versed in cleaning up his messes to make our life appear normal to the outside world. And you talk about this concept a lot in the book about keeping up the lie that everything
Yes.
is normal or even perfect, and that you even end up lying to yourself.
definitely. I think that it goes along with, I think at everybody's core, you want people to think that your life is good. You want people to think that you've got it all together. And I was no exception. And so, yeah, to the outside world, I mean, like I said it earlier, there's an embarrassment factor to have to admit that things really aren't good. But I think in my world at that time, the the easier route was just to sweep it under the rug and pretend like everything was great. And, everybody thought I had the perfect life. So I wanted to keep up that image. And yeah, now I can look back and say I was completely lying to myself. Completely. Yeah.
And it gives me really ill feelings in my body when I think about it, because I think it's when you realize it's a lie that you've been telling yourself and you've been buying into too. And then you need to face the truth, because once you see the lie, you can't unsee the
That's right. You can't. Yeah.
you can't unsee it. And then when you get to a place where you can't uphold the lie anymore, there's too much cognitive dissonance in that. Now you may feel you need to tell someone for your safety. You may have someone you trust,
Yeah.
but you've built up this world and you almost have to combat the world you created. So there's that aspect of seeking someone to hold space for you and believe you when you're really fighting this uphill battle, because this world has been created that's not only, been crafted as perfect because you naturally, completely from a neurological standpoint, psychological standpoint, was a normal thing for you to do, to create this image and want to uphold it. But now, so there are some safety issues in my mind that come up because, yes, you were upholding this world for yourself because of things like shame and meeting expectations. Yes, that is a part of the puzzle. But I don't think it's all of it, because often you were expected to hold up this image. And now, what are the consequences when you're no longer being such an avid cheerleader for this world, and your partner, the person who is abusing you, seeing that you're no longer at the front lines holding up the facade? And what's that going to mean for you and your family and your safety potentially?
Yeah. I mean, that is, when narcissists, when you, I guess, leave a narcissist, when you, as they see it, betray them, um, it's a very volatile type. You don't really know what to expect. And I didn't know because I had never really told him no before. So, yeah, it is a scary time. And, the problem there is that my ex-husband was a covert narcissist, meaning that in public to the outside world, he was charming and kind and humble and just all around perfect father, perfect husband. Um, but behind closed doors, obviously, he was not. But the problem there is, as you said, I was kind of his cheerleader and I was playing into this phony mask he was wearing. So not only was he telling the outside world, hey, I'm this great guy, I was also reinforcing that. So when it comes time to say, hey, I'm leaving this marriage, first of all, everybody thinks he's great. And second of all, I've told everybody he's great. So then you reach a point where you say, who's going to believe me? Because for 29 years, this guy's been great and I've been saying he's great. So yeah, it definitely is, it's scary. And then, like you said, you don't know what their reaction is going to be when suddenly you're not their cheerleader anymore. So it's a tense time for sure.
It really is. And I think that not enough can be said for someone who maybe hasn't been in this situation, or maybe they are in the situation, but they haven't gotten to this place for leaving, what it's like to experience that time when you know you can't uphold the lie anymore, you know you need to leave. And that really messy, dangerous, scary time where you're trying to navigate it. But like you said, you've never done this before. You've never even disagreed with, let alone
Correct.
said, I'm not doing this anymore. That's a big hurdle. And you've isolated yourself a lot over time, again, as a part of constructing the lie as a natural progression as it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Can you share your experience then? So, as you're in this really messy and scary time, I think a lot of people will turn to couples therapy or they will turn to individual therapy. Can you share, and I know you talk about it in the book and in your discussions about the book, share with us your experience working both with a couples therapist with your ex-partner as well as your experience with individual therapy, contrasting and comparing those, and what for you really helped you get to the point where you could overcome those hurdles and choose yourself.
Well, so one thing that I think a little known fact about narcissists is they actually like to go to therapy. They tend to want to try to manipulate the therapist, and a lot of times they're successful. Um, so my ex-husband, toward the end, he did not know at this point that I was going to leave, but things were crashing quickly, and he decided we should go to couples therapy, and we did. I thought, hey, this might be a good thing. And so we went, and I would say we probably had about 10 sessions with the therapist, maybe 8, 10. And on that last session, she actually kicked him out of therapy. Um, I had never witnessed anything like that before. I didn't think that, people got kicked out of therapy. That just seemed crazy. But she literally looked at him and said, I can't help you. She said, you can't see things from other people's perspectives. You can't self-reflect. And there is nothing I can do for you. And she, wished him well and said, please don't come back. So that was pretty earth shattering. For me, it gave me a lot of validation. I thought, wow, um, I think she sees what I see. So I later then had a one-on-one session with that same therapist and just kind of circled back and said, what happened? And she, yeah, she basically told me, she said, you need to leave. You need to leave. You need to get out. And it really did help validate what I was feeling. And at that point, I really had kind of left. It was kind of a slow process. I would go and stay with my parents for a few nights, and then I would go home, and I was kind of back and forth. But at that point, I really felt like I had the validation I needed to say, I really do need to be out of this. And from there, I went on to find a therapist who kind of specialized in narcissism and worked with her for about a year. So, and it was very helpful.
So, you were very fortunate, and I know it's hard, but I think it's good to find the fortunate within the unfortunate moments of our lives. You were so fortunate to be in a situation where couples therapy was helpful for you when you had a narcissistic partner because they recognized it. And I want to make sure that our audience knows, just in case this is their first time hearing about, couples therapy and controlling individuals. As you said, people who have narcissistic traits are very controlling. Sometimes they quite like therapy. They may fight you to get into therapy, but they then may become really interested and engaged in the process because they're learning tools to use.
Yes.
And they are also having a new captive audience to try to win over. And I think it's really important for people to understand that actually most therapists do not recommend going into couples therapy if you have a controlling narcissistic partner or you have domestic violence as a part of the dynamic of the relationship, because couples therapy isn't meant for that. And they will even screen you for it. That being said, you know, many of us know circumstances where you were screened for DV, for intimate partner violence too, or abuse, and it was identified, and then you went along with couples therapy, and then there can be some re-traumatizing that happens in that process, most people would recommend you focus on the thing that's the most beneficial, which you mentioned as well, the individualized therapy.
Yeah, definitely. Couples therapy with a narcissist is because you run the risk of finding a therapist that really isn't well versed in narcissism. Um, and if you get into that type of situation, your situation at home could become worse because that therapist, the narcissist will use the therapist as a, kind of as on their team to try to further control you. It sounds crazy, but it really does happen. And yeah, I like you, I would not recommend couples counseling for anyone that's with a narcissistic partner.
I think it's really important because, we've talked a lot about, you know, experiences that you've had and I've had and other people have had along the way of going through this where we kind of feel like, oh man, I did that and that I wouldn't recommend that. I think it's really important to say not to shame yourself for those choices you made because again, you were doing the best you could with the circumstances you had and facing so much confusion, control, coercion, and feelings of just simply not being safe, not feeling well. And you were doing the best you could. And you discuss that in your book, as well as in the interviews you've had about that general feeling of just being physically unwell after all of these years of being in a controlling and abusive relationship.
Yeah, people I think underestimate or don't think about the physical effects that this level of control and abuse has on your body. It puts you in kind of a state of fight or flight all the time. And just that whole concept of walking on eggshells, that creates a lot of stress in your body. And stress does crazy things to you. I dealt with chronic pain and headaches, stomach aches. Um, I was very sleep deprived. And those things really add up over time, and it will really take you down as a human. Our bodies are not made for this level of stress for this long. It's one thing to have stressful events, but when you're living in a constant state of stress, it will definitely have an effect on your physical well-being.
Absolutely, it will. And I think it's important to really hone in on the things that are being affected in your life that will cause those health impacts on you, not just psychologically, but your physical health. And one of the things that you touched on is sleep. We know how incredibly important sleep is. But if you don't feel safe at home or you're just contemplating over the changes that will occur in your life if you choose a different path forward, that's going to affect your ability to sleep. When you think back to your journey through this, what was the biggest hindrance to you getting the rest that you needed so that you could show up not just for you, but for your kids, for your job, just to live your life during that difficult and stressful time?
Um, the biggest hindrance for sleep was just my ex-husband himself. He was toward the end, especially his level of control just got more and more intense. And, toward the end, it was almost like he didn't want me to sleep unless he was sleeping, which sounds crazy. Now that it sounds crazier when you're telling somebody this than when you're living it. It just became my normal. But when I talk about this, it's like, "H- how did I do that?" But yeah, he saw tiredness or fatigue or sleep as a sign of weakness, basically. And so he wanted my attention 24/7. And it just got to be to the point that I didn't sleep really until he fell asleep. And it just over time, and then just all the stress and, like you say, all the contemplating, what should I do? I don't think I can live like this anymore. I had so much chronic pain, that yeah, he was definitely the biggest hindrance, on my sleep and why I wasn't sleeping like I should. But then you get into this cycle of you just become overtired, and then it's almost like you can't catch up on sleep. Um, and then he's telling you, well, there must be something wrong with you because you shouldn't be tired. I do more work than you do, and I'm not tired. So therefore, you shouldn't be tired. So, so yeah, and he was definitely the culprit in why I wasn't sleeping.
And if there's anyone out there that's hearing these phrases and these memories that you're sharing with us, Mia, and that it's hitting them, I talk about something that's called the trigger detector. And often in life, when we feel triggered, we recoil from that. That feels too painful. And I'm gonna stop listening to this. I'm gonna back away. And you may need to pause, right? If something that we share is triggering for you, you may need to pause. But be mindful of the fact that that trigger, it's your body telling you something that you need to know. Your nervous system doesn't send you that trigger without reason. And when you feel safe, when you're able, instead of recoiling back from that triggered feeling when you hear some of these stories, consider leaning into it and seeing there are different choices that you need to make for yourself, for your happiness, for your life, for your safety. Because that's why we have these conversations, and that's why it's so important to share this information and to write books like you wrote. Because when you hear someone else say it, like you said, when you say it out loud, when you tell someone else, when you hear someone else say it, it has a different impact on you. And that impact can be the difference between you really living your life or really truly living your life. Because these things, these things can kill people. It's really important that you heed the warnings that your body is making you feel to communicate to you that this is something you need to pay attention to.
Yeah, definitely. And if you're around somebody, if your partner is somebody that you can never relax around, if you can never have that feeling of safety or that feeling of just this is my safe place, I can just relax and rest and feel well, um, then you really need to examine if you're not feeling those things, you really need to examine who am I with? Because somebody that's causing that much stress in your body, like I say, stress is, it's responsible for all kinds of things on our body that can lead to diseases and all sorts of things. So yeah, you don't want to live under continued stress all the time. It's not good.
That's so important. I so appreciate you sharing that message. Now, you mention in the book a time when your then spouse presented you with a gift to, I'm air quoting here, rehabilitate you, and how this wasn't the only time that you and the other people in your home were subject to his propensity to try to teach you something. And a quote from this part of the book was, I needed to be fixed so that I could better serve him. He had had enough of my disrespect and imperfection. Tell
Yeah,
us more about that experience.
he really liked to teach everybody. He, as a narcissist, he believes he knows more than everybody, and we should be um, so thankful to him. That he wants to help us. Um, but yeah, he did. He decided that I needed to learn to be a better wife. Basically, this was toward the end of my marriage, and I was really trying to put a lot of distance between us because I just knew that I didn't know I was going to leave at that point, but it was just getting so bad. But yeah, he actually went out and purchased, I don't remember how many books on being a better wife. Basically how to pay more attention to your husband, how to be more attentive, how to respect your husband more. Um, and he presented me with all of these books, that I should read these books. And he thought I would be very thankful to him for thinking of me in that way. So yeah, he was very proud. He gave me a stack of books and multicolored highlighters and said, read away, read and take notes and, I can fix you. You can be what I need you to be. Um, and again, I'm telling that story and that sounds ridiculous. But at the time, yeah, it was just kind of what he did. And I'm not sure that I thought it was all that strange at the time, but, you know, FYI, I didn't read the books. I pretended to. I was, I had had just about all I could take at that point. So, but yeah, he really thought he had done something fantastic as a husband.
Mm.
And again, it's that control. I'm going to make you who I think you should be. And so I'm going to teach you how to be who I want.
Exactly. And not only control your access to finances, where you live, when you sleep, when you eat, who you speak to, where you go, how you socialize, but that's not enough. Now he needed to control your mind and how you think because it wasn't enough to control your physical being.
Right. Right. It was all, then it became more psychological. Those last few years of my marriage, it was, I need to get inside your mind and I need to control how you think 24/7. Um, there's a level of control that even I and like I say, it was my normal. And I did normalize all of it. But even toward the end, I was saying, this just doesn't seem right. And of course it was not.
And I think it's important, and it's such an important experience to share, and especially to experience really how it felt in your body and in your mind as you're starting to really notice that this isn't right, right? And you're starting to listen to your body, that it took you that degree of abuse, coercion, and control to say, enough is enough. I don't know how I'm going to leave, but I'm starting to recognize that I need to. And so I think it's so important for people who are listening who may see themselves in your story to understand you don't need to waste your energy, your precious time and energy, feeling ashamed for why you are where you are. But you do need to use your energy, again, talking about that trigger detector, to say, okay, this is how I'm feeling. Is this sustainable? Okay, it's not sustainable. What do I want to do about it? What is my plan? And really leaning into listening to your body, listening to what you need. And I think it's such, because you are obviously a very, very intelligent woman. Being an intelligent woman has nothing to do with the choices we make that put us in these positions.
That's very true. It's very true.
It's so important for people to understand that it's not about that. So shaming yourself for it is, it's just a waste of your time and energy. And like you said, your body is now feeling physical pain over the psychological abuse, or potentially even the physical abuse, the sexual abuse, the financial abuse. You're starting to feel physical pain. You don't have extra energy to spare. So now that you see that this is where you are, how do you, in this depleted state that you're in, move forward? So for you, when you were at your absolute lowest point, how did you, or what forced you to flip that switch and transition into fighter mode, into, no, I'm going to take care of myself now?
I think, the physical part of it, just the the pain I was feeling, the lack of sleep, I just felt my body breaking down. I really did. And I kind of reached a point where I knew if I didn't get out, I just wasn't going to survive. It just was not sustainable, the level of stress. And fortunately, I had parents that lived close and, I was able to go to them and they had been seen, they knew what was going on. They had known for years, and had tried to talk to me about it for years. And as a typical trauma bonded spouse, I my response was to defend it every time that they brought it up. But I was finally able to, basically to go to them and say, I have to get out. And so that for me, that was wonderful because I had a place to go. And yeah, I just slowly, I didn't really let my husband know what I was doing. And I just made a slow, gradual move over to their house. And yeah, but it was more just that my body just was not going to sustain the stress anymore. And I just knew it. So I knew I didn't have a choice.
I'm so glad that you made a different choice for yourself, that you were able to do that safely. That looks different for everyone because we all have different resources, and we all, again, there's going to be a day potentially where a choice is made. And from that point in time, that singular point in time, those resources that you have, that's what you're going to be working with to make the choices to get yourself safe and to get yourself back on track with your life. I'm so glad that you had your parents as resources. Were there any other resources that you leaned upon to help you get through that difficult time?
I had my parents, and then I was seeing a therapist at that time, once a week. That was huge. And I didn't have a lot of friends, but I did have one best friend that I was able to confide in a lot. And that was huge. I think that was as helpful as therapy was, really. Just having somebody you can talk to that's not going to judge you, and that really listens from a very open mind. Um, that was a very huge therapeutic thing for sure.
Having that support system is huge. And to circle back to something that we were discussing earlier, isolation is such a big part of that coercive and controlling relationship. As it evolves over time, you become more and more isolated. And as you said before, you may have contributed in your desire to build a life that truly was beautiful with what you had. You may have contributed to the facade, and it may be difficult to reach out to people. So it's so important to be mindful about who you confide in, right? Because not only could that information be weaponized against you if you confide in the wrong people, but also if someone's not in a place where they can support you just because of their own journey or their own mindset, that can be really difficult for people who are trying to leave abusive relationships too.
Yeah, definitely it is. I did find that, any mutual friend that I had with my ex-husband, those people didn't feel safe to confide in. And you do have to be careful. You have the issue of you don't know who you can trust. And coming out of an abusive relationship, I think we tend to not want to trust anyone. And then the other point that you brought up that's very valid is that some people just aren't equipped to be part of your support system. Not that they don't like you or that they don't want to help you, but they just don't have, the qualities, or they're not in a place in their life where they can be that support system. So I think coming out of an abusive relationship where you have been isolated, um, it is a challenge to find that friend who can be there for you and can support you. But it is important to find those people and kind of find your tribe. And you don't need a big support group. Just a few people really is all you need to pull you through.
I love that. And for it to be a truly supportive person, someone who can truly hold space for you and hold your story and your experience with care, because that's really important. Because even the tiniest mistrust or feeling of rejection can really push you back on your healing journey and on your leaving journey, if that's what you choose to do.
Yeah, it really can. And I found that I found the people that I thought were going to be really supportive, it turns out they weren't. And it's hard to accept, when you're in that situation. You're probably a little more sensitive to it, and it's a little more hurtful. But you get through it and you really do find out who your true friends are and who your people are. And it was eye-opening for me for sure.
So, Mia, I think it's really important to discuss the fact that here we are conducting this interview, and, you can see my face because I want us to be able to broadcast this as an audiovisual episode, but we just see a picture of your wonderful and beautiful book. And while I think it's wonderful to be giving it that space so that people have that recognition of it and go and read it, because it's very powerful, and I really believe it will help people and could really save people's lives and really impact their lives. I think it's really important for people also to feel the impact of why we're doing that. Why do I get to be here and you get to see my face, but we don't see Mia's face? Share with me why, as you're promoting the book, you've made the choice to be a faceless survivor and a faceless advocate.
Um, Really, it's for safety reasons. Um, my ex-husband does not know that I've written a book. He does not know that I'm doing podcasts. So yeah, uh, you know, that's not to say that he won't find out someday, but for now, I'm choosing to try to stay as anonymous as I can, just kind of out of fear, really. I'm hoping eventually that I don't have to always be anonymous. But for now, it just feels like the safest route to go.
Yeah. And I think that's really brave of you, one, to write this book and to promote it and be out here sharing your story on shows like ours, Talks with Dr. Shafer, and many others. That is so brave. And even just putting your experiences on paper or typing them out and sharing them is so incredibly brave. And I think, one, it's important for people to understand this is your story and you don't feel safe to share it with your face and your true identity.
And
That's important for people to understand, that there are so many survivors and people who are currently going through domestic violence, intimate partner violence, and they can't safely or don't feel that they can safely tell their stories. They can't show their faces, even though this is their story. It's their true story. This is what happened to them. And they don't feel that they get to share that story in a safe way. And so I think it's really important for people to understand and maybe try to put themselves in that position of understanding what that would feel like if you had a really important story to share with the world, but you didn't feel that you could just simply share your story without any desire to bring anyone else down or harm them, just to share what truthfully happened to you. How would that make you feel? And how does that change your perception of justice in the world? I also want people to, on the positive side of this, see that there are avenues to share your story, even if you aren't at a place where you feel that you can put your face or your name to it. You can still share your story. It's really important to do so in a way that you feel safe. You never have to share your story in a particular way or fashion. There are avenues, there are people that want to hear your story and they want to support you. So when you feel safe, join those communities, find those places. But we don't want you to feel forced to do so, because it has to be on your terms. That's incredibly important. And I really appreciate that you are a example to women and survivors of a different way that you can show up and share your stories and help not only yourself healing through sharing your story, but also help others who might see themselves and find inspiration and hope from the stories that you're sharing.
yeah, and that's what I'm hoping. I thought when I came up with the idea to write the book, I thought, obviously I need to find a way to do this anonymously. But I did feel like, surely the story could still get out there and could still help people, even if I have to be anonymous. So yeah, I'm thankful that I've gotten the opportunity to do all these podcasts and get my book out there. I really do hope that, you know, it will give other victims validation, and just maybe just give them some answers.
Absolutely. I think there's representation, finding yourself, seeing yourself in others is a key part of how we work towards recognizing opportunities for growth in our own lives and being on that path to reclaiming our stories. Mia, before we go, could you share with our audience the process of recognizing needing to leave this relationship, recognizing the physical strain it was having on you, and as you said, that it was not sustainable, to the process of being where you are today? Approximately, again, without any identifying factors, what did that look like? And what was that span of time to give people perspective as to how long a process this reasonably?
When I actually left, it took a year before I filed for divorce. That's a long time, but I was going through therapy at that time. I went through a year of therapy before I filed those divorce papers. That was a very scary thing to do. I did not know what his reaction was going to be. So that took a year. I had to really kind of find myself and build some courage. And then from the time that I filed for divorce, it was almost another year before the divorce was final. Divorcing a narcissist is not like any other divorce you've ever seen. Very long and drawn out and complicated and messy. And so now I'm just on the other side of that divorce, and it looks very different today. I've shared before that I think the biggest change for me is being able to wake up in the morning and plan out how I want to spend my day, decide what I'm going to do, exactly, what I want to do. And I don't have to okay those plans with anyone. I don't have to check with anyone. I have complete freedom to spend my day how I want to spend it. And it's a little overwhelming still, but it's a wonderful feeling of freedom for sure.
Mia, I want to celebrate you and your bravery, your courage not only to choose yourself, but to be a voice out there so that hopefully other women and survivors can be inspired to choose themselves too in their own time, in their own way, in a safe way, but yet focus on what really matters, which is seeking that freedom, that autonomy, and living their life the way they want to, because it is truly their life and it doesn't belong to anyone else.
That's right. Yes.
Mia, share with our audience how they can learn more about you and buy your book.
Uh, yeah, I have a website. It's miajhanks.com. And there's a link on my website to purchase my book. It's available online on Amazon, Walmart, Target, basically anywhere books are sold. It's in paperback and ebook format. And then I also have a TikTok account. The handle is at NPD. That stands for Narcissistic Personality Disorder, at NPD and me. And I post on there every day, just tidbits, information about narcissism, narcissistic abuse. It's just kind of a platform to raise awareness. So yeah, follow me on TikTok and check out my website, please.
I am so appreciative, Mia, of all the work you're doing. And I know that you are changing lives through sharing your story. And I'm feeling so blessed that we were able to share your story and how you've changed your life here on the show today. Thank you so much for being a guest. I
Thank
am
you so
so
much for having
excited.
me. Thank you.
I'm so excited to see all of the amazing things that you're going to do moving forward. Please keep us aware, and we will have all of that information in the show notes for listeners so they know how to find you and how to read your book. I want to put a disclaimer here. If you are a victim of domestic violence, I want you to be cognizant of how you are accessing information about intimate partner violence. Be wary of making sure that your passwords are only known to you, that if you're reading a Kindle book or you're listening to an audio book or checking something out from the library about narcissism, controlling partners, domestic violence, that you are making sure that that information is private and that isn't something that's used against you or that contributes to feeling unsafe. And the same goes to, we want you to access information about domestic violence, but we want you to be very careful about how you do so to make sure you're not putting yourself at risk. So please stay safe and take care out there. We're here to support you. We're so happy that you're here. And let us know how we can support you better on your journey to choosing yourself and choosing your safety. Thank you so much for being here, Mia J. Hanks, and for the amazing work that you're doing through your book and speaking out against intimate partner violence and abuse. Thank you so much to everyone in the audience for being here too. Please subscribe so that you don't miss any upcoming, inspiring, and informative episodes of Talks with Dr. Shafer. Stay safe and take care. I'll talk to you soon.
Everybody's lonely, but you can hold on to me, and I will try to make it right. Everyone needs something. Let me be that one thing, and I will try to ease your mind. I can't bear another moment. I'm getting on the 'cause there's nothing